Well, again, it's my pleasure to be here with you. It's always great to come to conferences, and I go to a lot of sessions, and I learn a lot, and it's fun to speak as well. This is an overview of European record collections on MyHeritage. My name is Mike Mansfield. I'm the Director of Content Operations. Some of you may have already heard me speak a little bit before today or in this afternoon. I'll just briefly give my introduction again. This is my 5th year of working for MyHeritage. Prior to that, I worked for 5 years for Family Search and 9 years for Ancestry, trying to work for all the genealogy companies. And then before that, I also worked for several years on some software that was designed for CD-ROM publication. Let's go ahead and start. A few people are still trickling in. All right, so we're here to talk about Europe. And I am taking sort of a classical definition, but I will bend it just a little bit, as you'll see towards the end, of what we mean by sort of European records. Let's first start in England and Wales. And I will try to be jumping a little bit to some demonstrations here and there. For people doing English research, one of the most important record collections, and this is available on several sites, is the England and Wales Civil Registration Index. This is an interesting collection in that it's really the gateway to a much more important thing that we do. Let me find my mouse. There it is. And just blow this up. So one way that I usually will navigate to collections by country is I'll come down to our map widget here. So here if I click on Europe, I get a list of the countries and jurisdictions of the United Kingdom, as well as a separate list of countries in Europe. And if I'll go to England or Wales, I would see these first two collections that I'm talking about. So let's look at this first one, the England and Wales Birth Index. And in many of these, I'll just be using the example record that we've prepared. In much of our recent publication work, we've been selecting an example of someone hopefully famous or notable and provide a link directly to their record. So this is the example of Richard Adams. He is the novelist who wrote the novel Watership Down. So clicking here, we see that we get a record for Richard G. Adams. The downside to this index is you don't get an exact birth date. You get birth years and quarters. So here I'm learning that this gentleman's birth date is in the 2nd quarter, April, May, or June, and he's born in Newbury, Berkshire, England. This is the information that I use to actually then go to the government record office. Yes. Yes, thank you. So delayed. Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I did misspeak, and we should probably also correct it. This is more the registration date when he was filed with the civil registration office. So once you find the individual that you're wanting to get information on with these volume and page numbers and information about the date, then you go to the government registry office. So one way I find that is I just Google, I don't know, England Civil Registration, Death Certificate, or whatever. And usually I'll get a link. Often I'm not looking at it in Norwegian. So here's an example. And these links will take me to, I should eventually, yeah, here's one. And this is sort of the starting point for ordering these records. And this is a process. If you've done English research, you'll start to find that you do this quite often. So we have these indexes. Again, these are available at other sites as well, but an important collection also at MyHeritage, the Birth Index, Marriage Index, and Death Index up through 2005. Yes, question? Sure. So her comment was, I think once you have the information, you can go directly to the registration office. Is that in Kew? No, that's the National Archives. Sure. Thank you. So what you get eventually are these documents from the registration authority there in the United Kingdom or England and Wales, and it's these little bits in the middle that contain the actual copy of the registers that they keep. For many years, about 10 years ago, even more than that, 12 years ago, there was a rumor that they were going to digitize these and actually have an online service where you could see them instantaneously and perhaps for a much reduced cost. That project has never come to fruition as far as I've never been able to tell, and they still like this paper process. One more question that I am going to probably ask to hold the questions. We do have a live audience. Well, that's nice, right? So, like most record collections, the information that they collect does evolve a little bit over time. In some of the birth records, there's a certain date where you'll start to see, for example, the name of the mother as well. So currently, if you want the certificates mailed in about 2 weeks or 3 weeks, actually, with 14 working days, the certificates are £9.25. If you want rush, it's even more. But yeah, these are fun to get. I've learned lots of new information about my English family by ordering these actual certificates. So again, these are the indexes that you use to procure those important documents for English research. Census. So we're happy to say that we have a complete run of the English census starting in 1841. Prior to 1841 in England, there were censuses that were done, but they were primarily statistical only in nature. There are some exceptions. There are some parishes where, or civil registration districts where names were collected, but those are fairly rare. But they do exist, but quite uncommon. But starting in 1841, we get an every name census, unlike what we've seen in the United States, which only started in 1850. In 1841, we get a name of every single person. Some caveats, though. I believe it was 1841. I'd have to refresh my memory. Or 1851. The ages of children are rounded to the nearest 5. That was as instructed. So sometimes you see interesting data, but it's always helpful to read some of the header information on the census documents. They can sometimes give you clues to some of these other things that they've done. So jumping back to the website, if I want to find these, again, I'm just going to come to, I'm struggling to find my mouse. It's over there, and there it is. Okay. So again, under the research tab, again, I could come in and look at them in the place control down here. We also have a category where we've placed our United Kingdom and Ireland census. This is also a nice way to search across them all at once if you wanted to do that. I generally find myself not doing these large global searches or category searches, but drilling more specifically into a collection and doing just a specific search. So the 1911, 1901, these are ordered in this list by the number of records. So again, a full set of censuses through 1911. The 1921 census in England and Wales and Scotland was taken on June 19th. However, it was done under a new legal framework there in the United Kingdom known as the Census Act of 1920. I've read this act in some detail, and some of my colleagues here in the audience may know more than I do about this, but my reading of it seems to suggest that there is perhaps a challenge that the populace in the United Kingdom could make to blocking the release of this census. It was never intended to be made public under that act. However, I know there's quite a few organizations in the United Kingdom that have been asking the government to follow tradition and to release this after a 100-year moratorium. So we're still hoping it's going to be made available in early 2022, about 4 years or so. But I think there is a small chance that it could be challenged. That's unfortunate. The 1931 census for England and Wales was destroyed in a fire in 1941. It was not caused by German bombing operations. It was just a fire that started in a warehouse, and it was a complete loss. So the 1921 census will be particularly important because we have a gap now between 1921, and the later census materials. Also in England, they did not collect a census for 1941. The government had other pressing things on its mind, as you can imagine. So the question is, will this 1921 census represent the final snapshot for all UK society for 30 years? And unfortunately, it doesn't, because the government leading up into the World War II period did collect what they call the Register of England and Wales. It's much like a census. For each household, we get full names, genders, addresses, and most importantly, a full birth date with day, month, and year. And in a way, this is a nationwide birth index as well for England and Wales from 1939. We also get marital status, place of residence, and occupation. So coming to MyHeritage, you'll see the collection here, 1939 register. Our collection, one limitation is we have chosen currently not to license the images. The images of this content are available, and you'll find those on other sites such as Find My Past, but the index is a complete transcription of everything on the image. Now, there's cases where the transcription may not be accurate and you'd still want to see the image, but that's just one drawback to our collection is you won't find the corresponding images. But here's an example of Winston Churchill in this content. So again, very famous person that we all know, Winston Churchill. He's living in the city of Westminster. He's the head. His wife is listed, as well as a number of private secretaries, a civil secretary, a butler, lady's maid, housemaid, and a cook. So wonderful house groupings here that we get. A lot of these house groupings we actually did in a fairly complex post-processing work once we had the index, as it's not always clear where houses start and stop in the original records. So some of these house groupings or all the house groupings that you see are actually kind of a derivative work that we did to the product. So great news for England and Wales is this 1939 register. There are actually about 8 more million records that are protected by privacy. If you look at the original images, they've actually been digitally whited out or blocked out. And these names and new images will be released every year for the next 20 years or so, adding about another 8 million records to this content. The way that the government specified this project had to work is it had to protect the privacy of persons that could be living unless they had a match to a known death record. Another important collection, one that you've heard about this week a little bit that we just released, is the England and Wales Index of Wills and Probates, 1853 to 1943. Again, content that you'll find on other sites. 59 is an important date in English probate where it changed really from the Church of England taking care of probates to the civil authorities. So this has just the end period of the Court of Canterbury, the index of these wills and probates. Again, these were mostly wills of fairly well-to-do individuals. Let me show an example of what they look like. It's not the actual probate, but it's an index to the probate or letters of administration from which you can then go and at other government sites in the United Kingdom actually order, hopefully, the existing will. So if I go to England, and if I go down below all the censuses here, it's very long. There it is. Yeah, it's a fairly recent one that we've completed. So here's an example of Wallace Henry Hartley. I didn't really know who this was until one of the persons on my team suggested this as example record. He's famous for having played the violin at the sinking of the Titanic. So he has some probate information in here about his estate. William Henry, yeah, here we go. Yeah, died at sea on 15th of April, 1912. 656 pounds, 17 shillings that he had in his estate. So this is an interesting talk that I was asked to give, because when I get this question about, how many collections we have on MyHeritage, what are some of the highlights. It's always a difficult kind of eating the elephant type of problem. And one of the things that I struggle with is we have a very long tail of content. I've seen this at Ancestry, at Family Search, at MyHeritage. All the organizations have this sort of problem where it's easy to talk about these really big, huge collections, such as, you know, the England and Wales Birth Index. It's tens, even hundreds of millions of records in size. But if you go down what we call the long tail, you can find on MyHeritage things like the parish registers of Kinnerley in Shropshire. It might only have 50 pages in a book like that, maybe 300, maybe, you know, it just depends. So we end up dealing with this problem often by making what we call compendium collections. Let me show an example of a compendium. And this is something that librarians and archivists have struggled with for decades. So let's say I'm a librarian and I have a book that I've purchased or was donated that's a compendium of short stories by multiple authors. What do I do with this? Do I make one catalog record? Do I make 20? It's a challenge. And so we face the same thing also at a great scale. So a collection I talked about in my session before lunch is this large collection of compilation of published sources. I'm crossing my fingers, the internet's going to hold. Yesterday at this time it did hiccup. There we go. Compilation of published sources. So here we have almost 500,000 books, 447,000 books, 84 million pages. So our collection catalog, which is a fairly new feature that many of us were advocating for a long time, only has one record for this compendium. I would love to see us have a robust, complete catalog where we've put in all 500,000 books, for example, into our catalog. We haven't done that. We have other compendiums that have the same challenge, particularly in newspaper collections, where we're not letting you easily find everything that's on the site. Now, this particular collection I was just referring to, the compilation of published sources, does let you search for titles, but again, oh boy, this is what I feared. And I think it's when the hotel resets and it makes me reaccept their little terms and conditions. Have you seen this if you're staying in the hotel? So let's try it. If not, yesterday I had to turn on my hotspot on my phone. Great. Hopefully it's going to stay. So in this large compendium that we have, compilation of published sources, I can come here and I can search for a title by, books by title. And let's just try, for example, parish register. And I apologize, let me zoom in a little bit. That's going to be easier to see, I think. Parish register. So this is going to look for pages of books where the book title has parish register in the title. So as we can see here, we have 59,000 pages of content that has where the title of the book is parish register. Let's do some quick math and reduce this to something we can wrap our heads around. So 59,000, a common measurement that librarians and archivists use is about 200 pages of printed material per inch. Sorry, us in the US haven't converted to the metric system yet. So we have 259 inches, and we can multiply that by 0.3 to get meters. So we have about, if I did that right, I didn't divide by 12 yet. Let's get feet. About 7.4 meters of paper. In other words, if you were to print out these 59,000 pages and stack them up, it would be about 7.4 meters high. So that's one way that librarians often measure collections, is by linear shelf space, we call it. And so just here in this one collection, we're seeing a fairly large set of material that isn't going to be easily expressed in our collection catalog, because these titles would not be findable that way. So when I talk about the long tail, this is kind of what I'm referring to. I could spend hours talking about these smaller books that if you have ancestors in this parish in Shropshire, it could be extremely relevant to you. Whereas something like the England and Wales Birth Index, if you have English research, anybody is going to be likely interested in that. So just want to have you keep that in mind, that we'll just be highlighting some of the largest collections, some nuances that I've just chosen from a topic that we could speak for a very long time about. Some other honorable mentions in England and Wales, and another thing I wanted to point out, and you'll see this as you go throughout MyHeritage, you'll see collections that are titled like this: England births and christenings with a year range, marriages also with year range, and deaths and burials. What these are in almost all cases are sliced up sections of the old International Genealogical Index. This was a large database that was compiled by the LDS Church or the Mormons over many decades, that contains a lot of different information from different projects that they've done. At the height of its single sort of database existence, I think it was approaching 800 million records. But what Family Search or the LDS Church have done is they sliced it up by these smaller localities and types, and then in a partnership that we have with Family Search, we've been allowed to republish this. So you'll see these in England, in Germany, Belgium. Almost every country in Europe will have some form of these. These in England are particularly large, but you'll see these as you go throughout these various sites. So kind of older data from the International Genealogical Index. I wanted to mention that. What I'm showing here at the bottom is, for a long time, these were published on microfiche cards. You'd go to a family history center and you would see these sort of racks of these cards, and often large cases as well. And then in the late 1980s and 1990s, they started to have an electronic version that was primarily distributed on CD-ROM. So that one united IGI thing does not exist anymore. It's been sliced up. You'll also find it on Family Search as well. Ireland. So some nice collections for Ireland, the 1901 Ireland census and the 1911. And then a very important collection for Irish research called Griffith's Valuation, 1847 to 1864. It's often uncommon to see a property assessment like this in sort of a highlights for a country. And that's because, as I think many of us know, there was a very tragic event in Ireland at the start of the Irish Civil War, where the garrison had chosen to turn the records office into an armory. And as the attacks escalated, that building was bombed or shelled several times until finally 2 large truckloads of essentially dynamite exploded, destroying a huge percentage of Irish records that were estimated to go back for at least 1,000 years. So in Ireland, we kind of have the little bit of a significant record loss, more than a little bit. And that happened on the 30th of June, 1922. And here's a photograph that was taken of this large mushroom cloud with those records going up in smoke. So in Ireland, as we as a company look at, how can we help serve our customers, we'll look at things like this: Slater's Directory of Ireland, Pigot's Directory of Ireland, things that are going to act as substitutes for those earlier Irish censuses that were destroyed. Index of Irish wills, again, a fairly small number there. So many other things we could talk about in Ireland like this that are used as substitutes, but that's something that we definitely look at and take into consideration as we're trying to build collections. Some of the work that we've done in Sweden, I know there's been much talk about it here at the show. I won't delve too much deeply into it, but the Sweden Household Examination books, 1860 to 1947, 130 million records. One of the funnest collections I've ever had the chance to work on in a partnership with Archive Digital. So as I mentioned in my talk yesterday on Scandinavian records, this partnership was that Archive Digital, this company in Sweden, they took color photography of these books. They licensed the images to us. MyHeritage did the indexing, and we're licensing the indexing back to Archive Digital. So you'll find the same index on both sites. I think they've published up through 1930, and we will be delivering them the last 17 years, probably as early as next week. So sometimes you'll see the same content on sites like this because of a partnership such as this one that I described. A minor partner in this project was also Family Search. They'll have the same index from 1880 to 1920. So the index of this you'll see on MyHeritage and Archive Digital will have quite a bit more content on both ends of the chronology there. Denmark. So about 5 years ago, we entered into a wonderful relationship with the National Archives of Denmark, where it was funny. Initially, we were just asking them about doing a project of their census records. And as we were visiting with them, they said, oh, and would you want to maybe kind of also do the church records? And this is when you sort of fall over as someone working in my space, because these types of projects rarely just land in your lap like this. You're often spending years and years negotiating with an archive, and they sort of just brought it forth. It was quite amazing, something I'll never forget. So this Denmark Church Records, it was recently just only completed last March, 48 million records, with some of the books going back to 1576. So if you have a Danish family like I do, this is an amazing finding aid. This links directly to the images in every case. There's images that these records come from of church records. Yeah, they're in Denmark throughout the entire country. As I mentioned, our primary intent with this project when we started was to do their censuses. Denmark has one of the best census taking traditions that I've ever seen, starting in 1787, where they were doing full name census indexes. Again, unlike the United States, which only started full name in 1850. And many of the later censuses also have full birth years, birth days, so day, month, and year, also acting as another sort of nationwide birth index. So coming back to the site. Wow, it's just not wanting to work. There we go. So again, following the same pattern that I've demonstrated a little bit before, I would, if I'm interested in these Danish or Swedish records, there's a number of ways I could find some of these. Here on the left under categories, you'll see that we have some of our largest and most popular collections in these topical categories. So here under Nordic Census, you'll find the household examination books. These are also a type of a clerical or church census. That's why we classified them here. And then all of the Denmark censuses are here, as well as an important Finnish collection that I'll talk about in just a moment. That's one way I can find these. Another way is I can come down again to the map and click on Denmark, and I'll be able to see them all here. One thing that I did want to point out here on Super Search is, now this is a type of query that we often see, just a name, James Wiggins, and we get this big, long, huge list of results. I often don't do this because one thing that we do at MyHeritage that sometimes I'll admit drives me a little nuts is we rank our tree collections higher than historical records. So I often will switch to the summary tab if I'm doing a search like this. So in the summary tab, what's really happening is the system is really asking me for more information. It's saying, hey, you dummy, James Wiggins only gave you, 56,000 results, but what were you really looking for? Were you looking for a U.S. Census? Were you looking for some other type of census? And so if I'm doing a global search to see kind of broadly what we have, this is often how I'll start to evaluate collections, is I'll drill in through the summary tab and then go into specific collections with their various hit counts. This is very helpful also if you have a really uncommon name, where a global search can be quite helpful. But you'll see here that I can get different categories of the various collections that we have. If I know, oh yes, I am looking for this guy in North Carolina, I can focus my results a little faster that way. So that's one way that I also like to navigate, is to go to the summary tab. Let's come back to the deck. Great, so we talked about census. So the 1940 census, as I think has also been announced, is almost done. It's probably going to be done before the end of the year and published, bringing another 3.8 million records. So when that one's done, we'll be completely caught up with our censuses in Denmark. It's been just an amazing project. This has been about a 5-year project as well. coming soon. So currently there's 37.5 million records with another 3.8 on its way. Let me get the rest of my images here. So another project we did in conjunction with the National Archives of Finland is we approached them about doing, in Finnish, this collection has a number of different names and you can translate it a number of different ways. It's sometimes called the main and confirmation books. We decided to translate this as the Finland Church Census and Pre-Confirmation Books, 1657 to 1915, 33.3 million records. This actually follows a tradition that the Lutherans had established in Sweden with these household examination books. Throughout all of Scandinavia and Finland, we owe an immense grant of gratitude, or we're immensely indebted to the Lutheran ministers for the work that they did in collecting the records. In Finland, they followed a similar pattern to what they had done in Sweden with these amazing household examination books, but with some important differences. One of the differences that you'll see in this collection is that children are recorded separately until they were at the age of confirmation, which in the Lutheran faith then I understood occurred about the age of 13 to 14. So you'll often find a married couple in the main books and they won't have any children listed, and that's because their children are listed with them as a couple in the children's books. And so that's why this sort of complex title, the Church Census and the Pre-Confirmation Books, referring to the books for children prior to their confirmation. This was also done in collaboration with Family Search and the National Archives. This index in time should appear at the National Archives of Finland. We've provided it back to them where they'll be able to provide it for free to anyone who would like to use it. The Netherlands, with some help from a colleague of mine that's here in the audience, Bob Corrett, we've been able to publish a large collection of content from the Netherlands. The Netherlands is really setting, to me, the gold standard across the world for open data initiatives. If all archives and government institutions were as progressive as what we're seeing in the Netherlands, it would be an amazing world for us as genealogists. Their archives are well-funded, they're well-organized with highly skilled staff, and they're actively publishing their content on the internet and for free, and are very open to publishing their content also in a way that other organizations like us can acquire it freely and republish it. So this is certainly not exclusive to MyHeritage. You'll be able to find this at other sites also in the Netherlands. But again, as a company like ours, we're also very much interested in aggregating content. If we can aggregate content and provide that in our unified systems and tools, then we see a lot of value in doing that. But yeah, you'll definitely find this at other places. Bob, who's here, has a wonderful site that will even be more up to date than what we have. I want to talk just a little bit before I jump around into some other countries, is some of the social and economic drivers that I think we need to think about as we do research in Europe. And I've long perceived this need, but I guess it's up to you to decide how important it is. But so as we think about Europe and someone from North America, I'm always thinking about my ancestors that came from Europe and those that, they descend, their ancestors of those that came. But as we really start to do more genealogy, especially with DNA, it's increasingly important to understand who are the descendants of the people that stayed in Europe, right? Who are my distant cousins that still live in Norway? I talked about that in my DNA talk earlier. So the need to understand who's in Norway for me as a North American, and I perceive that the need for a Norwegian to know who's now in Minnesota is equally important. So here's an example of what I'm calling a social and economic driver. This is the Great Famine, or the Irish Potato Famine. During the years of 1845 to about 1848, the potato crop in Ireland failed, I think, 3 or 4 years in a row. This was the staple food product for most of the population. This graph on the left shows the population of Ireland peaking at just over 8 million compared to the population of the rest of Europe on its own axis. So, Ireland didn't have anywhere near the number of people in Europe, but you see that Ireland today still has not recovered from where they were there in 1845 before this great economic event happened. So when these things happen, we need, and I'll show some other examples, to me, it's always important as genealogists to think about the historical pushes and pulls that are happening and where our ancestors are going to be moving to find better conditions as they work to support themselves and their families. So for Ireland in particular, I think it's important to recognize that there's some wonderful records in, we'd say, U.S., in the United States, that have a lot of Irish immigrants in them, such as passengers arriving in New York from Ireland, 1846 to 1851. So right in sort of that sweet spot of the Irish migration. Over 1 million Irish immigrants left in that time period. Ellis Island and other New York passenger lists, again, has a tremendous number of records for persons coming from Europe and other parts of the globe, and smaller ones as well, such as the Boston, Massachusetts passenger list. So this is a chart of immigration to the United States by year. You can see that it is in no way consistent, right? There's a lot of peaks and valleys. And what happens if we turn this on its side, we can start to see the drivers. So here's the start of the Great Famine. And then we have a Homestead Act. This was a very important driver, especially for people here from Scandinavia, to want to immigrate to the United States to obtain farmland. Then we have some economic depressions, or panics as they called them back then. So conditions in the U.S. were not quite as good as they had been, and letters go home, and people maybe decide that staying where I am now might not be that bad. Some other depressions, again, kind of curtailing these spikes. So quite a few of these depressions happen over time, and then things like, of course, World War I was a major negative impact on migration or immigration as well. And then sort of bookending the migration acts in the United States is the Immigration Act of 1924. So we can, I believe, show direct correlation between these economic events and migration from Europe to other places, not only to the United States, but Canada, Australia, other places that our ancestors would have gone, including South America. Just here, another brief snippet for you about Nordic immigration. Over 1.2 million Swedes left Sweden, particularly for the United States, between the period of 1868 to 1914, with the highest decade being the 1880s, when every year of that decade, more than 1% of the population of Sweden immigrated to the United States. By the 1930s, it's estimated that approximately 20% of the Swedish population had immigrated. So just a tremendous number of people. That's 1 in 5 people had left by 1930. 800,000 Norwegians. An interesting fact about Norway is, with the exception of Ireland, no other country contributed more of its people to the United States than Norway. So as a percentage, it comes only in second, with 800,000 immigrants. 300,000 Danes and nearly the same number of Finns. So with my Scandinavian ancestors, they've all been immigrating definitely in these time periods, and knowing when these start and stop are definitely helpful to know when I should expect them to come to the United States and when they were departing as well. I did some data mining of some of our censuses to illustrate a little bit. So I'm going to show you some data visualizations really quickly. So this is the 1850 U.S. federal census, which is the first census we have in the United States that talks about, or has this question about where, if you're a foreign born, where you were born. And so this is showing us this great flux of immigrants from Ireland on the left to different regions in the country in the United States on the right. So here's 1850, again, the countries in Europe on the left, primarily Europe, with the states on the right. 1900, you can see that the German immigration wave really starting to pick up here by 1900. Italy is still quite small, just up there at in the top at just about 300,000, or actually about 500,000. And then by 1940, you can see just huge numbers: 1 million Russians, 1 million Poles, almost 2 million Italians, very large numbers of persons obviously immigrated to the United States. So I just want to point out that I hope you look at some of the U.S. records that we have on MyHeritage and other sites as great sources of information for your European ancestors. The 1790 to 1940 census, again, birthplaces start in 1850. So from 1850 to 1940, there's 674 million records. Not all of those are of foreign-born persons, obviously. We have a full set of the Canadian censuses, 1851 to 1921. 1921 was released, I think, in the last 6 weeks. And another one that you might not have thought about is something like the United States World War I draft registration. So as the United States prepared to mobilize to support the European conflict here in France, they conducted a large registration of eligible men who could be drafted. Not all of these men were drafted. Obviously, the Army was no way ever near 24 million people, but every eligible man was basically included in this draft. And so here's an example of a person that I found in this collection from Norway. He's from, looks like they're on line 5. And to me, it might not be spelled perfectly right. Arndal, Norway. Is this a place you guys know, or is it close to one? And it's missing an E or something? Right, so, and he didn't fill out the state, darn it, but I guess a native Norwegian's instantly going to know where this is. So he's from Norway. Here's his name. It's interesting that he's a fairly young man at 22, but he's claiming exemption because he's married and has a wife and child, and I think he's saying he's supporting a mother or mother-in-law. So an interesting type of record that you can find in the United States of here's a native Norwegian gentleman. He's declared his intention to naturalize, which means he isn't fully finished that process of becoming a United States citizen. So there's going to be many tens of thousands of these types of examples, hundreds of thousands in this large collection of World War I draft cards that can give us information about these people that have come to Norway, help find where they're from, that hopefully could lead you to other family members in those other countries. Another project I wanted to quickly mention is one that Gilad had referenced yesterday in the keynote, and that is the work we have done to enhance the Ellis Island Index. So starting in, I think, 1897, they added this question to the passenger records that they were collecting as the ships came into the port of New York and to the other ports in the United States. We're doing the same work for Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, New Orleans, San Francisco, the other ports that we're using, obviously, these same government-supplied forms. We've finished the work for New York, which is by far the largest port, but the other ports are still important and coming out soon. So this question was whether you're going to join a relative, and if so, what is the name of this relative and their address? So there's 16 million additional names of relationships of persons coming from Europe or wherever they're coming from to be with their family in the United States. In the case of my grandfather, my mother's dad, who immigrated from Wales, he lists in this question his brother who immigrated from Wales a few years before he did. So again, I'm seeing two Welshmen, my grandfather and his brother here in this one record, if I were to show you that example. By, I think, 1907, they added a second question, and it's over here. The form's now much longer. They keep adding questions to this form, and there's the initial question that I showed you. This next question is the name and complete address of the nearest relative or friend in a country whence the alien came. So this is the name of someone that knows of the immigrant in the homeland. So again, in the case of my grandfather, this man who immigrated from Wales, he lists the name of his father who stayed in Wales, or my great-grandfather. So here in the New York passenger list, I have the name of my Welsh great-grandfather who never left Wales. So an interesting behavior that you'll find in this collection. Let me show you an example really briefly of what you can do with this. It's quite fun, or something you'll see. And if I can find my mouse, there we go. And I'm just realizing I'm running out of time, so this will be one of the last things we will do. Is I'm going to go to passenger lists, and I have a really difficult Italian name, Ignazio Beravecchio. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing records for this Ignazio Beravecchio. And let me go make sure I did one thing, because I want to only get exactly these names and nothing else. So let me change those to match name exactly. So we see this Ignazio Beravecchio is here 5 times. And so what's happening here is he's being listed as the relative in the country where his children are immigrating, and then he himself is actually a passenger in one of these. And I think my next slide here shows this example. So in 1910, he's listed as the father of one Francesco, or a Francesco Beravecchio. In 1913, he himself immigrates. 1916, he's listed as a cousin of a Pasquale di Petro. So again, we have some information about some relationship here between Ignazio Beravecchio and Pasquale di Petro. And then finally, in 1920, he's listed as the father of a Vito. And I thought there was one as well where he's potentially also the husband. I may not have put that one on the slide. He was listed as the husband of a Francesca. So we're getting all sorts of new information here about this family that's in the index that hopefully is going to help us find more records. So let me wrap up. We could spend a long time talking about highlights of the collection. I hope I've given you some pointers how to find them. Use the country geography widget. Look at the collection catalog. Look at these compendium collections that I've mentioned. Definitely put your tree on the site. That's going to be the best way to find some of these hidden gems in MyHeritage, is to have a tree on the side and to let our smart matching system automatically do those searches for you. With that, I want to thank you. Again, my name is Mike Mansfield, and I'm happy to hear from you if you don't have time to talk today. So thank you for coming.